Well, I apologize for my lateness. I wish it could have been helped. But here we are. Well, I want to get right into a couple of things here. Morning. Brother Wayne sent me an email with a query in it that I thought, well, my goodness. Brother Wayne's got that question. Somebody else might too. It might come up. And somebody else thought, well, my goodness, I'm just ignorant, and therefore I'm just not understanding this like I ought to. So having been a teacher for years in Maryland, I know that when somebody has a good question, probably others do too. So I want to deal with some things about the Smoot division and Elder Smoot in particular, and talk about it this morning. Well, good day to you too. Good morning, everybody. We're getting our normal group here. Oh, am I going to have to pick you up? Am I going to have to pick you up, little girl? All right. Looks like she was sound asleep till I started talking. Sound asleep. I mean, curled up. Good afternoon. Yes, good afternoon. It is, 6 hours difference over there? Been a long time since I was there, but that sounds right. Well, I want to look at a cat, evidently. One of the things I went over to the office for was Elder Phillips's reprint of Elder Smoot's Reminiscences. This was his first book. Elder Smoot published The Sectarian and wrote extensively for that, of course. Elder Smoot published a pamphlet on the Constitution of the Virginia Annual Meeting, or Virginia Corresponding Association. I can't remember which was his and which were the black churches. But this will tell us. 63. Even though Elder Phillips titled this wrong, it's not Reminiscences of Baptist in Virginia. It's Reminiscences of of the Baptist singular of Virginia. I found the original, a photocopy of the original in the Alexandria, Virginia Public Library. That's where we first found that. This was Elder Smoot's first book. It was printed in 1902. Just about everybody involved in the contest was still alive then. His other work that he published was the contest of 1886, 1889. That was published in 23 and 24. It says the copyright's 1929 on this copy. This is an original copy, hand-bound by Elder Smoot himself. It was the property of Elder W.J. Barry, and it was given by him to me in 1981. And I've treasured it ever since. The only other copy I've seen, original copy, is a copy in the Primitive Baptist Library there in North Carolina. I want to use the reminiscences for this discussion as my primary source because it is older by over 20 years. And the principles, he tells us in the contest that none of the principles that were involved in the division of 86, 89 are still alive except him. Where in 1902, I think they were all still alive. May have been one or two that had gone on, but not many. Let me start out this by saying, and let me get this here. I don't believe that Elder Smoot was ever less than truthful. I believe he told the truth as he saw it, and he experienced it. First thing I want to look at, though, this morning is why there was a division in the Virginia Corresponding Meeting in 1886, the time period between 86 and 89, and why Elder Smoot took those three churches out. Well, he didn't take three churches out. He took two and a part of Frying Pan. Okay, Virginia Annual Meeting. I'm correct. I was correct there. Goodness gracious. All right. On page 63 in Brother Phillips's reprint of this work, Reminiscence of the Baptist Singular of Virginia, he says this, and if you have a copy of this, please look at it, because I need to make a correction to a note here in this where he's totally wrong. In this chapter, this is chapter 12, the division of 1889, the third contest. He talks about, in the first few pages, some problems in Kentucky with the Linking Association, with whom they were in direct correspondence, and some other problems in the Mount Pleasant Association with which they were in indirect correspondence. And those chains of correspondence will bind you pretty tight if you aren't careful. And I'll say this now, I can't figure for the life of me when you see that associationalism, in other words, putting associations up on a pedestal and claiming for them more than what they ought to have, caused this division in one sense of the word. In a very real sense of the word, humanly speaking, why in the world Elder Smoot would go out and form an association, first cracker out of the box? I mean, that just doesn't make good sense to me. Okay, but the real reason for the division of Elder Smoot with the main body of Predestinarian Baptist is as follows. The association, at the same time this trouble was going on in Kentucky, a serious trouble arose in the Juniata Association from Pennsylvania, with which association, the Virginia corresponding meeting was in direct correspondence. While the Western trouble appeared, at least on the surface, to be of a doctrinal character, the trouble in the Juniata Association came up directly upon a point of order. Juniata Associations in southern Pennsylvania, north of western Maryland. Have you ever heard of the Sidling Hill Church? That was the last church in the Juniata Association. Elder Wood was the last one to serve it. It divided, and there was an absolute side and a conditional side. Of course, Elder Wood served the absolute side. There was also a meeting house in the town of, oh goodness gracious, can't think of the name of the town now. It's a town right outside Sidling Hill, and I think I found where that meeting house was. It's in use by some other denomination now, of course. The association had received into its membership a church which it had previously dropped for disorder. That'd probably be a good thing, assuming the disorder was corrected. Now, here's the problem. While this church was out of the association and in disorder, it had received and baptized several members. I'm not going to make Brother Smoot an offender for a word, but I never knew a church could baptize. Now, when this church applied for readmission into the Juniata Association, objection was made to the baptism of those who had been received and baptized while the church was in disorder. The objection was first made by the messengers of the Tigard Valley Association, with whom the Virginia corresponding meeting was also in direct correspondence. Okay. Tigard Valley River Association. That's what he's talking about here. Most just called it Tigard Valley, but the real name was the Tigard Valley River. The Tigard Valley River flows from here in Fairmont down, well, it flows up to Fairmont from down in southern West Virginia. There's one church left that was in the Tigard Valley Association. That's the church at Leading Creek at Montrose in near Elkins, West Virginia, where Elder V.B. Lynn had his membership and where he was pastor for years. And I believe it's still active. Haven't been in a while. That's to my shame. In fact, the Tigard Valley had two churches in it until I moved up here in 2007, I think. Until 2007. And there was a church right here outside of Fairmont, Amnon, that went down right about that time. He gives a note here. This is Elder Phillips's note. Note, the Tigard Valley was not an affiliate of the Eastern Association, of which Beebe and Warwick were in. Yes, it was. That's totally wrong. Tiger Valley was. This was part of the overall problem with correspondences. It was of a different order. Yeah, no, it was not of a different order. It was affiliated with the main body of Predestinarian Baptist in the United States from its inception until a division in the 1950s. It was of a different order, which did not recognize churches as having independence in their own internal affairs, but looked on associations as overlords of the church that created them. That's not true either. It's got the same thing in its constitution as all of them do. The Eastern associations always refuse to interfere in church decisions. That's not true either. And he's got Eastern associations in quotes because he's using Smoot's term, by which he means Delaware, Delaware River, Baltimore, Salisbury, Warwick, Chemung, Lexington, Roxbury, Maine Predestinarian Conference, all those old associations that went up the East Coast. Following the downgrade of 1890, the Eastern associations adopted the disorder of those of the Tigris Valley correspondence. No, they didn't. And it hasn't remained to this day. Those associations didn't even exist in 2012. None of them. By 2012, there was none left in what Smoot considered the Eastern associations. No associations left there. None. And anybody with, I hate to say it like this, but anyone with one good eye and a third grade education could see that. So there you go. Now listen, if they're so, Tiger Valley is so disorderly, listen to this. Objection was first made by the messengers of the Tiger Valley Association, with whom the Virginia corresponding meeting was also in direct correspondence. The Juniata Association, however, against the advice of the Tigris Valley messengers. In fact, in the face of their earnest protest, as well as a protest from at least a part of the messengers from the Virginia corresponding meeting, ignored the whole matter and received the disorderly church into their fellowship, and thus became involved in the disorder of that church. Now, about the same time, the Mount Pleasant Association of Kentucky divided by efforts of Silas Durand, P.G. Lester, and Elder J.G. Eubanks of Georgia upon the questions to which we have previously referred. There was no direct correspondence between the Eastern associations and the Mount Pleasant, but a few hot-headed Eastern preachers who had become involved in the Mount Pleasant troubles prevailed upon the Delaware River, Chemung Association, and the Warwick to open correspondence with the disorderly party in the Mount Pleasant and dropped correspondence of the orderly parties of the Mount Pleasant and Licking Particular Association of Kentucky. I hear Brother Smoot contradicted himself because he said there was no correspondence between the Eastern associations and the Mount Pleasant, and here he says they dropped correspondence. So, I don't know which is right. I haven't been through all the old minutes. What minutes I have been through, I do not remember any correspondence, direct correspondence with the Mount Pleasant Association from any of the Eastern associations. So his first statement is more right. They may have induced them to open a correspondence with the disorderly party, what he calls the disorderly party. As far as doctrine goes, they probably were. Now Smoot comes up with one of his good little things. Not much more could have been expected of the Chemung Association of New York. Chemung Association was as much in Pennsylvania as it was in New York. It was right there on that border area. Toward the eastern part of Pennsylvania where it borders with New York. Not much more could have been expected of the Chemung Association of New York, who were a body of Baptists that paid very little attention to order. But better things might have been expected of the Delaware River. That was in New Jersey. All of its churches were in New Jersey, except for a couple in Pennsylvania, right on the Pennsylvania-New Jersey border. And the Warwick Association, which was in New York. Than to have acted so indiscreetly, only upon principle already spoken of in the close of the last chapter of these reminiscences. The Virginia Corresponding Meeting met, therefore, in August of 1889 under very serious and important circumstances. Okay, here he goes. This is why this is doing this, why he's doing divide. She was called to pass upon questions of a vital nature affecting the doctrine and gospel order which she held. The Virginia Corresponding Meeting at this time was composed of 10 churches located as follows: Occoquan, Quantico, and Bethlehem, whose places of meeting were located in Prince William County; Frying Pan Spring in Fairfax County; Alexandria in the city of Alexandria; Upper Broad Run in Fauquier County; Mount Zion, Ebenezer, and New Valley in Loudoun County; and Mill Creek in West Virginia. The Virginia Corresponding Meeting, having thus refused to notice the disorder in her correspondence, met with the Occoquan Church on Wednesday preceding the third Sunday in August, 1889. All right. The Occoquan Church. This church was also known as Oak Grove. This was Elder Smoot's home church. I believe it had been served by Elder Leachman before him. The Occoquan Church sent a letter to the association calling their attention to the disorder in which the Juniata Association was involved, and requesting that the attention of two Eastern associations should be called to the character of their correspondence with the disorderly part that had been dropped by Mount Pleasant Association. The letter of the Occoquan Church will be found in the appendix of these reminiscences marked A. It isn't. He lost it. I'd love to read it. I'm sure it contains some choice language. Elder Smoot did have a way with words. The letter was read with the letters from the other churches on Wednesday morning. And on Thursday morning, a motion was made to drop correspondence with the Juniata Association because of its disorder. All right, so the Virginia Corresponding Meeting is dropping the Juniata Association because it didn't do what it thought it should. I don't know. Maybe they were right, maybe not. Our brethren had been present at the session of the Juniata Association when they received the disorderly church, and as we have before stated, had protested against it without effect. Consequently, further labors with the Juniata Association was unnecessary. I disagree with him there. If they had anything against a church in the Juniata Association, there they were, hurrying this thing along when it wouldn't hurt to wait, to talk to the churches individually, talk to the pastors, talk to the members. Say, look, this is the way we see this. How do you see it? Labor doesn't mean you stop with a big public meeting like that, which is probably wrong anyway. If we believe that churches are to deal with churches the way individuals are to deal with individuals, then they should. And did anybody, what's not said is, did anybody go to that church that was received and say, we really have a problem with this. We want you to understand our position, and we'd like you to explain yours so we can see why you don't think it's a problem. That makes sense to me. All right, we got another note. While Elder Smoot is dealing with activities in Virginia, one may examine the activities in the Warwick, Delaware River, and other Eastern associations and discover that all of them were compromising the doctrine. No, they weren't all compromising the doctrine. And order previously maintained from the beginning of the Baptist in the East, in order to unite with the former Means Baptists all around them in an ecumenical union. Number one, there were no Means Baptists around the Eastern associations. There was no conditional primitive Baptist on the eastern shore of Maryland, Delaware. Well, you got Wilmington Church that went with the conditionalist after a bloody division that shouldn't have happened. Humanly speaking, it shouldn't have happened. Pennsylvania didn't have any except the Juniata in that area. But New York, no. New Jersey, no. They weren't all around them, which is probably one of the reasons, and I'm just speculating here, brethren, that some of these that he mentioned, Lester, Eubanks, or Lester and Durand in particular, he wasn't around them enough. Now, eventually, he'd get to see the duplicity of Oliphant and others. So there. This movement is referred to as a progressive or liberalizing movement, which necessitated a downgrade both in doctrine and gospel order to achieve such a union. These are not progressive primitive Baptist, which is a denominational name and is the true outgrowth from the primitive Baptists that were called Means Baptist. But that division hasn't even been thought about yet, hadn't even happened. Let's go on though with Elder Smoot. Efforts were made at once to suppress a discussion of the motion to drop this correspondence. Those who were leading and liberalizing the weak elements among the professed Old School Baptists of the East well knew they could not meet the question brought forward by the Baptists of Virginia who desired to walk in the old paths. And I don't know whether this is Elder Phillips's note or Elder Smoot's. He's got A.B. Francis in there. Notwithstanding, however, the desperate efforts made to suppress a discussion, the matter was discussed to an extent to bring it intelligently before the association. Upon this motion to drop correspondence with the Juniata, he says Juniata Valley, it's just Juniata Association, the vote stood 4-6 against 22. The specious pretext put forth by the leaders of the disorderly party, parentheses progressives. Now, brother, I fully believe that's Elder Phillips's note, not Elder Smoot's, because I don't remember him calling them progressives. Called them liberals, called them all sorts of things. At this association, was that they could not interfere with the internal affairs of another association, a thing which we had not asked them to do. We had simply urged upon them to get rid of the disorder of an association in correspondence by dropping the correspondence, not by interfering in their internal affairs. Well, technically he's right. But you're dropping them for an internal affair. The Virginia corresponding meeting, having thus refused to notice the disorder in their correspondence, on Friday morning, the Occoquan and Quantico churches withdrew from that association. A wild scene of excitement and disorder on the part of the majority party in the Virginia corresponding meeting followed this act of the withdrawal of these two churches. An attempt was made to break up the meeting by the leaders of this liberal move among the Baptists, and while they were rapidly leaving the ground upon which the association was in session, followed by a surging, excited crowd of following, our brethren sang the lines, "How firm a foundation, ye saints of the Lord, is laid for your faith in his excellent word. Fear not, I am with thee. Oh, be not dismayed. I am thy God, and will still give thee aid." Much excitement and fleshly feeling was manifested upon the ground, and in a short while, near the entire party had withdrawn while the association was in session, leaving our brethren to quietly pursue the worship of God under their own vine and fig tree, which they did, continuing the meeting until late in the afternoon and in the presence of a large, attentive, and orderly congregation. To the writer of this article, who was at that time a novice in such contests, it seemed astonishing that Baptists who had stood as they had in the Virginia corresponding meeting should so quickly and completely ignore their own record and the doctrine and order that they themselves had previously professed to believe and love. Since that time, however, we have learned that when Baptists turn to leave the truth, they pay no attention to consistency nor former profession, nor can a pen of written historical articles of faith be built high enough but what they will jump out of it. So that's the real reason for the Smoot's division. It wasn't doctrinal. He tells us in the contest, if I can remember where, let's see here. Where did he talk about the? Excuse me. I don't think there's a table of contents in this book. And there isn't. I was right. Unless it's at the back, which it kind of is. Oh, it's just the photos. All right, conclusion. We've got to get over here to the Juniata Association. Somewhere he says, here we go. This is where I wanted to get the contest at Quantico. He gets a little more plain here. I think it's because no one's left but him. He talks about that church was Fairview Church, and that's the name of the town, was Fairview. Let's see here. Okay. All right, here we go. Here he's going to tell us about what really happened. The Occoquan and Quantico churches had been fully warned of their approach. The watchman upon the walls had sounded the alarm. That would be Elder Smoot, who was pastor of both those churches. And by the grace of God, they were ready for the onslaught. The Occoquan Church, in their letter to the corresponding meeting, called attention to the disorder in the Juniata and the Eastern Associations in opening correspondence with the disorderly so-called Mount Pleasant Association of Kentucky. It might be well to call to attention for any future reference that the Virginia corresponding meeting at this time was composed of 10 churches. All of its churches, with the possible exception of Mill Creek, were represented at this session. The Occoquan and Quantico churches were represented as follows. Quantico, Ezekiel Lynn, J.M. Barbie Sr., J.W. Chapman, L.A. Lynn. Occoquan, Elder W.M. Smoot, Orvis Maxfield, Enoch Grimes, C.S. Stone, James Posey, James Clark, J.F. Grimes. I will mention as an aside, I met J.M. Barbie Jr. I also knew, I believe, Ezekiel Lynn's granddaughter. Met her and talked to her. She was actually raised by Janie Lynn. I believe it was Ezekiel's widow, her grandmother, and remembered Elder Smoot quite well and the meetings. A fair sample of the order prevailing in the corresponding meeting at the time is evidenced by the clerk of the corresponding meeting, the late G.G. Gallagher, adding to the list of the messengers from Occoquan the name of J.W. Davis, a man who, though present at this session of the association, had never been appointed a messenger from the Occoquan church, thus establishing the precedent that the clerk of an association had power to appoint a messenger from the church to the association. This was a fair sample of the order observed among this class of Baptists and matched the action of the Juniata Association previously referred to in admitting Sidling Hill Church, whose members had broken open the doors of Fairview Meeting House and held meeting there over the head of Fairview Church, and who had excluded members which Fairview had received, and yet was received in the Juniata Association side by side with Fairview Church without any acknowledgement whatever. The contest at Quantico. Now notice something here. In the original, and what we read from the Virginia Reminiscence of the Baptist of Virginia, Virginia corresponding meeting, having thus refused to notice the disorder in their correspondence, met with Occoquan Church on Wednesday preceding the third Sunday in August. This says the Virginia corresponding met with the church at Quantico Wednesday, August 14th, 1889. Silas H. Durand represented Delaware River, although the association at their session in May previously had not appointed him. William L. Beebe was present as a messenger from Delaware and Warwick. F.A. Chick and Milton Dance were messengers from Baltimore. Hence, we had representing the disorderly Baptists of the East as preachers Duran, Chick, Beebe, Francis, and Badger, the last two members of the corresponding meeting. Occoquan and Quantico churches, this is what I want to get to right here. Occoquan and Quantico churches have been fully advised of the situation, and we trust by the grace of God prepared to meet the coming storm. At the session of the corresponding meeting held at New Valley the year previous, August 1888, an effort had been made to force upon us their view of election and the birth in a circular of that year. A public attack was made from the stand upon our views, although up to this time the churches of the meeting had claimed to hold the sentiments that they now proceeded to discard. In the year from 1888 up to the session of 1889, misrepresentations, falsehoods, and downright lies were circulated against us. And it became clear that we were hopelessly separated from those who were determined to force us to accept their views or, as previously stated, drive us from their ranks, and we considered that it was useless to prolong the contest. The Occoquan Church, in their letter to the corresponding meeting, called attention to the disorder in the Juniata Association, requesting the corresponding meeting to drop that association from our correspondence, as Juniata had been labored with in vain. Also, that the Eastern Associations had opened correspondence with the disorderly element in the Mount Pleasant Association and requested that their attention should be called to the matter. The letter of the Occoquan Church was written in a courteous and brotherly manner. There was nothing in it calculated to give offense to orderly Baptists. It should be borne in mind that at this session of the corresponding meeting, the disorderly party had a majority of messengers. Hence, they were able to outvote it. I copy from the manifesto of the churches on page 9 the proceedings in connection with the reading of our letter. Quote, the letter from the Occoquan Church was read from the stand with the letters from the other churches. Our brethren who were present remember the uncalled for and disorderly attack made upon that letter from the stand the evening after it was read by a minister who came among us uninvited and undesired by our churches, but who was imposed upon us by the majority party in the Virginia corresponding meeting as a messenger from Eastern associations. Our brethren also remember the remarkable discussion, if we may call it a discussion, the following morning, Thursday, August 15th, in the corresponding meeting upon the motion to drop the correspondence with the Juniata Association. At the proper time in the order of business in Thursday morning session and in obedience to the instructions of the church of their membership, the messengers from the Occoquan Church moved that the correspondence with the Juniata Association be dropped. Then followed a remarkable scene. Instead of properly and fairly discussing the motion made by the authority of one of our churches of her membership, an attempt was made by the majority party to implicate the brother who made the motion in some inconsistency as though he were under trial. We repeatedly urged them to discuss the matter, declaring our ability then and there to prove the statements made in our letter. They, as continuously, fought against the discussion, attempting to force upon us, in its stead, a personal wrangle. In the midst of the excitement, and while our motion was still before the meeting, never having either been considered or voted upon, another motion was made by one of the majority party as follows, quote, resolved that this association does not consider it in her province to interfere in the internal affairs of corresponding associations. Close quote. The move of this resolution was, I think it should be mover. Mover of this resolution was pleased to term it an amendment to the original motion, and we were informed that it could be considered and voted upon instead of our motion, we suppose under, quote, general parliamentary law. Of course, it was no use for us to inform the Virginia corresponding meeting that we were not under general parliamentary law, but in this particular, we're governed by the fair old school Baptist regulation. So uniformly observed in orderly old school Baptist churches that every motion properly seconded shall be considered and voted upon unless withdrawn by the brother who made it, and that a second motion cannot be entertained while the first is under consideration. The motion which we made was not voted upon, not even fairly discussed. We saw that the design was to substitute this so-called amendment for our motion. When we saw that the design was to substitute this so-called amendment for our motion, we informed the majority party that the adoption of that amendment would be considered by our people as an endorsement on the part of those who voted for it of the disorders of the Juniata Association. Believing that it could be easily shown that this amendment was not in order and did not apply at all to the case under consideration, we arose to discuss it. But we were informed that discussion was not in order, that one of the objects of the amendment was to shut off discussion. With a total disregard for order and of the feelings of the minority party, with no opportunity whatever to fairly discuss it, this so-called amendment was rushed through the Virginia corresponding meeting by a majority vote, and our two churches were given to understand if we were not satisfied, we could withdraw from the corresponding meeting. What do you think of that? This last information, however, was unnecessary, as thanks be to the God of heaven, the keys of our churches were not in their hands, and we were not dependent on them to know what gospel order required of us at the proper time. But let us glance a moment at this amendment to our motion. Resolved that this association does not consider it in her province to interfere in the internal affairs of corresponding associations. We ask the candid reader, had we requested the corresponding meeting to interfere in the internal affairs of the Juniata Association? We came to the corresponding meeting charging the Juniata Association with disorder, which charge we were ready and abundantly able to sustain had we been given the opportunity. Has one association a right to drop another for disorder? All orderly Baptists will answer promptly yes. This was the simple case at issue. We have copied this statement from the manifesto at length because it fairly represents the case. The Occoquan Church had expected from the general disregard of our view or feelings by these people that they would pay no attention to our request. Hence, it had been decided when we adopted the letter that if this course was pursued, our churches were instructed to withdraw from the association, notifying them that the church had so ordered. The letter from the Occoquan Church was read as stated with the letters from the other churches Wednesday, August 14th, 1889. Thursday, August 15th, in obedience to their instructions, the messengers of that church moved to draw correspondence with the Juniata Association. Upon the refusal of the corresponding meeting to pay any attention whatever to our request, it was evident that the time had arrived for our withdrawal, but we concluded to wait until Friday morning in order to give the Quantico Church opportunity to consider the situation. The Occoquan Church, as previously stated, had instructed her messengers to withdraw from the corresponding meeting in case our request was refused, but we desired to give Quantico an opportunity to act with us if they so desire. As moderator of the association, I had an influence in the appointment of preachers to fill the stand. As the majority party had shown their desire for weak things, I concluded to arrange to have the stand filled that Thursday p.m. with the weakest preacher we had, F.A. Chick. While he was preaching, we arranged to call a special meeting of the Quantico Church to consider the situation and sent a messenger to all members present on the ground to gather at the meeting house, which resulted in a full attendance of the membership with the exception of the two male members, J.W. Chapman and L.A. Lynn, who decided to go off with the other party. The matter was fully and thoroughly discussed at this church meeting, and upon motion, the church decided to withdraw with the Occoquan Church from the corresponding meeting. Unanimous on the part of all present, with one exception, J.M. Barbee Sr., who stated that while his mind was not clear to move in this manner, yet he would not oppose the church in her action. And to his credit be it said that after seeing more of the course of the order and doctrine of our opponents, he became fully satisfied with our position, and many pleasant visits our members have enjoyed with him at his hospitable home as in former years. So, I could read the rest of this, but I'm going to forbear. We see that even though there were, particularly in the West, some doctrinal things going on, that the reason for the division that Elder Smoot perpetrated, and that sounds awful. I shouldn't use that. The real reason for the division that happened among the Virginia corresponding meeting was not directly due to any doctrinal issue, but rather because of the Juniata Association receiving Sidling Hill Church back into fellowship without any acknowledgments on her part that she had done wrong in separating from them in the past. Now, I've got the Sidling Hill minutes here, and I must confess I didn't look that back up again to see if there's anything in there about their leaving the association or they're coming back in. But I plan to do that, Lord willing, when I finish here. Yes, they were weak on eternal union. Yes, the majority party was weak on absolute predestination. Yes. Well, no, they were not weak on absolute predestination. That's just it. They were weak on eternal union. But they weren't weak on absolute predestination. There's a classic writing by Elder Chick on absolute predestination. It's really good. William Beebe seems to have been a non-resurrectionist. I don't know whether he was or not. I haven't read enough of him to know for sure, but I was always told he was. So whether he was or not's another story. Durand was soft. There's no doubt about that, but he was harder than the Means Baptist, harder than the Clark Baptist, and he found that out, which is why I said that if Elder Smoot would have waited, and if he had not, and you know, if those churches had not have pulled out of the corresponding meeting then over that Juniata thing, it's my opinion, within 2 years, the rest of them would have dropped correspondence with him. And he wouldn't look like the one causing division. They would have. That's what I was trying to get at. But Elder Smoot, seemingly, based on what I learned about him and based on what people told me about him, could be hot-headed. And that's just part of his personality. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm saying that's what it was. All one has to do is, if you ever have access to the sectarians, look at the list of agents. I always find it fascinating when I deal with old school Baptist periodical to look at the list of agents if they have them, see who they are, see what they have, see how they change. For example, I've told you Elder Newport in Illinois, but Elder Parker's co-worker, was an agent for the Science of the Times till he started publishing the Western Predestinarian Baptist. He was also, for a time, agent for the Primitive Baptist in North Carolina. If you look at Smoot's agents, They get smaller and smaller and smaller as the years go by. Those who were with him at the beginning, only a few of them are going to be with him at the end. Many of those who were with him, according to what people have told me, he, Elder Smoot, brought charges, maybe. Anyway, made it to where they wouldn't come back. They wouldn't fellowship. And most of them who outlived him migrated right back to the Science Baptist. And if you've ever read the signs in the 30s and 40s, even up until the 50s, I believe, see the name L.L. Shank. There are Shanks here in this part of West Virginia. I don't know if that's where he came from. May well be. He's an agent for the sectarian when he lived in Nebraska, Wyoming, and Kansas. I think his personality, and that's what was alluded to me by two different people, one of which was very close to Elder Smoot during his lifetime. But for some reason, in this man's later years, he was just nasty about Elder Smoot. But he's the one that discovered him, discovered his body there in Elder Smoot's home. And he's the one that said, you know, all that stuff is garbage that you read about his death. He said he didn't come to town for 2 days. People got worried about him and sent me to see what was going on with him, because this man had driven him to his meetings as Elder Smoot was elderly. And he started driving. He started accompanying him to different places and things like that. And he's the one that said he found him with his feet on the stove and a Bible in his lap, his glasses on his head and his hands folded, and it looked like he went to sleep in peace. And he had a wistfulness in his voice when he told me that. But then he told me he wished that Elder Smoot had never written the contest and wanted to know how in the world I could have gotten a hold of such a thing. And after that, he called Brother Barry and upbraided him for giving me a copy of it. But he was. I had other people who were neutral there. Yes, I met people who were neutral on Elder Smoot. There was a lady who was the part-time worker there at the, well, I say part-time, the Occoquan Town Museum was only open 3 days a week. And she was the one that took care of it. And she remembered Elder Smoot. And she and her husband had known him. And she thought he was a wonderful man, but strange. He loaned them personally the money to start their business. If it was bad weather or something like that, a lot of times they would take him to his meetings. And they thought it was strange that he never asked them if they'd like to stay. And he just would thank them and get out and go into the meeting. But anyway, she thought he was rather strange. And then Janie Lynn's granddaughter, if you read the Sectarian much, you'll see letters from Janie Lynn. And she raised this girl. I don't know what the situation was with her parents. Uh, in the town, there was the Lynn Company. And when I saw that, that's the first thing I thought of was this Janie Lynn that wrote for the Sectarian a lot. And I went in and asked. And the fellows who were older than me that were running it said, "Oh, you need to talk to our mother." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, you need to talk to Mom. She'll be here about 9:30, 10 o'clock." I said, "Well, I'll be back." And even she talked about his personality and how she was afraid of him as a young girl, as a little girl. He was quite the orator, from everything I've been able to tell. But this is the other thing that this is what it seems like. I can't be dogmatic because the last member of any of his churches died in the late 50s, early 60s. She's buried there in the cemetery that's what is left of the Beulah Meeting House in the town of Occoquan. The meeting house was destroyed in one of the floods. Susie Hickson. And I hate to say this, but we've been accused of being cultish in the past, the old Baptists in general. I think his people were as much as any old Baptist ever has been because Elder Wood told me that they would visit Sister Hickson in the nursing home, even though she'd been a member of Elder Smoot's church and all. They would visit and generally have a nice visit with her. And one time he asked her, he said, "Would you like me to say a word of prayer before I go?" And she said, "I don't believe Elder Smoot would want that." And that was never mentioned again. What I'm saying is this man was correct doctrinally, much more correct than his enemies. He was a strong personality. He was a man of influence among certain ones. He influenced churches from Missouri and Kansas all the way to Virginia and West Virginia. Well, Virginia would be further, sorry. So there. And you were going to agree with him or you were going to be gone. Now that's what I'm saying. I think all the others we can prove from his writings and from people who knew him that yes, he was right doctrinally. We know that from his writings. I have found very little to disagree with in the writings of Elder Smoot, and it's insignificant what I have found. As far as the great doctrinal truths of the Word of God, he expounded them faithfully. Even so far as to being in a situation where he could look at the revised version of the New Testament and a Greek New Testament and have some input from scholars on it and defended doctrine of the new birth, the heavenly birth, from the Greek text. Who would expect that from a primitive Baptist preacher at that time? although his predecessor, Elder Leachman, was evidently a pretty good Greek and Latin scholar because he boarded and taught people in his home, seemingly based on census records. Elder Trott learned Greek and went to New York to live with Elder William Parkinson, who was pastor of First Baptist Church, New York at the time, I believe, and lived with him to study Hebrew. You know, our people have not always been ignorant of the languages. But Smoot, he did that because he wanted to see, you know, it's my opinion, he wanted to see if that bore out what he believed. And it did. And he wasn't afraid to publish it when it did. There's an article in the Sectarian about it. I don't think I've got that volume here. I'll have to look. Man, you know, he was this strong personality. He was this great orator. He had the biblical knowledge that is outstanding. He had an insight. And then he had also this seemingly, if you don't agree with me, I cut you off attitude. I don't know. I love reading his writings. I think I would have liked the man. Honest to a fault. He got roped into being partner. This is what I was talking about. He got roped into being partners in a bank in Occoquan. And his partners embezzled most of the money out of that bank. The Elder Smoot made it good. He didn't ask him to take a penny on the dollar, a dime on the dollar, or 50 cents on the dollar. He made it good. That's what she told me. See, he was going to be a lawyer before the Lord. He was going to be a lawyer before the Lord revealed himself to him. And I read somewhere that it was said that he would probably been the greatest legal orator in Virginia since Patrick Henry. I don't know. Oh, I find agreement with his doctrine too, brother. I love it. I love him. I want to think I'd like him. I want to think I would want to think we could walk together in fellowship. But based on what I know on his personality and what it seems to be, and this is one of the reasons that there's old minutes down there in the library in North Carolina in the vault that I want to go through, because I know that maybe after the death of R.M. Thomas, but I think it was before the death of R.M. Thomas, he had done cut the Western Missouri off, Western Corresponding Association of Missouri off. And with it, first Kansas, I believe. And they were the two far west associations that stood with him in the division. I want to see if there's anything in their minutes to tell us why. Well, it could be. It could be. It could be. But like I say, it's my opinion that if he wouldn't have advised his churches to cut themselves off from the corresponding meeting over that Juniata Association mess, that within 2 years, the majority of what we would call absoluters today would have cut him off. And I hate to say this, but look who's involved. Chick, or William Beebe. Let's start with him. William Beebe, editor of the Signs after his father's death. F.A. Chick, associate editor of the Signs, pastor of the church at Hopewell, pastor of the church Black Rock, Hopewell, New Jersey, Black Rock, Maryland. Silas Durand, pastor of Southampton Church, pastor of Salisbury Church in Maryland. When I moved there in '81, there was still a member alive that was baptized by Elder Durand. Of course, she was a young girl at the time, and she was over 100 years old when I knew her, or around 100 years old. A.B. Francis, who left Virginia and went to Delaware, served the Little Creek Church that I served in Delaware. John Green Eubanks, who after he left Georgia went to Kentucky and then where? Newark, Delaware, and served the Welsh Tract Church. Badger and White stayed in Virginia. I was a member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans camp in Salisbury, and I'm reading the magazine one day, and there's a picture of Colonel E.V. White. He was one of the last Confederate veterans in Virginia. So, but those are the main ones he mentioned. There is a sadness. This is a sadness. That's why I asked Brother Barry after he gave me that. I read that book at his house. He asked me if I'd ever heard of Elder Smoot, and I said no. And he handed me that book. I don't know why. Well, providence of God, obviously. But humanly speaking, I don't know why. And I sit there and I'm reading that book, and I go to bed and I can't sleep. And I get up at like 4 o'clock in the morning, and I go in his study and turn the light on real low, and I'm reading more in it. And after he gave it to me, I asked him, I said, Brother Barry, what do you think about Elder Smoot? For all of them that want to say Brother Barry was a conditionalist, he looked me right in the eye and said, Brother Smoot was right doctrinally. He said he was wrong in separating like he did. And I thought, well, why? And after much study, I'll admit this, it took much study of the writings on both sides, on my part, mainly his, and the old sectarians. And I saw it. If these guys were so adamant against your doctrine, why let that Juniata mess be the dividing point? Why not let them kick you out because of your stand doctrinally? That you're not going to compromise eternal vital union. You're not going to compromise absolute predestination. And if you can't walk with me, kick me out. And they would have. It's my opinion that they would have dropped those churches. And I'll tell you another opinion I have. There were that would have been the first probably big division since the Clark controversy. What am I saying? I'm saying if he let them kick him out, more people would have been sympathetic to the cause and would have united. You got people like Bartley, who he called a means Baptist. You got people like H.M. Curry, who he called a means Baptist. Smoot did, who would probably have stood with him had they kicked him out. But as it was, it looked like he was being petty about a problem in an association that may really have been none of his business. Hold their feet to the fire. That's what we have to do with error. And yes, I'm saying that the majority on both sides. Wait a minute, both sides of what? Both sides of what? Yes, it did. Both sides of what? The Clark Baptist and the BB Baptist. The majority on both sides. The majority on both sides couldn't walk together either. But in this respect, I think there was enough people who believed the truth and who stood for it. You know, think of the areas that were not affected by this division. Tennessee, Alabama, Louisiana, Arkansas, Texas. Had no effect on them. Oh, I talked about Shank. There was also A.D. Jones, who stood with Smoot, who later is going to come back to the Science Baptist. When those who oppose Smoot die off, those who Smoot seemingly pushed out come back to the Science, and they've been with them. I'm going to tell you, I believe L.L. Shank must have believed in eternal life union, because I know, despite the fact he'd had several strokes, I certainly believe Elder Winfrey believed in the heavenly birth and the eternal union. And that's who baptized him, was Elder Shank in the First Kansas, in the last absolute church left in Kansas. That was part of that First Kansas Association. You know, remember what Elder Smoot said one time: like baptizes like. If you got the soft element, they're going to soft ministers, they go to baptize soft members. Yeah, this is sad. To me, this is a sadder division than the conditionalist division, because you've got decided Arminianism among the conditionalists. You've got just almost blatant Arminianism. It's just hidden enough that a lot of them don't see it. But this one, you've got good and precious brethren tore up. tore up over things like this. Yes, this is the saddest, in my opinion, of all of them. Although it's pretty sad that Greg Thompson lied so much, and pretty sad that John Clark misrepresented. We'll be kind to him. Greg Thompson, I got no use for. He lied flat out. John Clark misrepresented the views of Beebe and Trott on the eternality of the union of Christ and his people. All right, anything else? You put it up there. I got to get some more coffee. I ain't going to be able to talk anymore. Oh, division. I've said it before. I'll say it again. The history of the old school Baptist is a history of division. Period. I mean, that's just the way it is. And it's sad. In fact, when we finish the Fulton Confession, we're going to talk about the saddest division I think I've ever run across, and that's the Fenton controversy. J.M. Fenton. I ain't going to tell you a thing about it. If you don't know about it already, you might as well just be surprised when we get into it. Because I guess that's after the conditional division. That's the next one, I guess. Well, you got the progressive division. Maybe we'll cover it first if we're going in historical order. But yeah, the history of the Baptist, particularly the old school Baptist, is a history of division. And that's awful that we have to say that. But I think that's one of the reasons that Brother Barry said that, that the library there in North Carolina is to document the history of the old school Baptist, regardless of what faction they are. Regardless of what faction they are. Yeah. Yeah, he's talking about that, but yeah, he might have got along if they had tried to do that. But what I was talking about, and I'll send you an email on it. The actual thought that I had was, what was the real reason that was given for dividing? And it was the action of the Juniata Association. We oppose it. That's our attitude when we see error coming into the church. We oppose it, just like Smoot did. We proclaim the truth. We speak against the error. That's what we do. We become a watchman, or we are a watchman. And we see that error approaching, we sound the trumpet, we sound the alarm. The question is, now what do we do when we see an error coming? But how do we handle it if it gets there? With me? The question is, how do we handle it once it gets there? And that's what we have to look at. It's how we handle it. And we've got several choices, so to speak. Do we do like Smoot and just boom, divide? Immediately? No, I don't believe we do. I believe we labor. And if this, listen now, if this is a member of the church, well, we need to deal with them as members of the church. Not as an enemy, but as members. However, when it comes to it, we may have to purge off the body. We may have to exercise discipline, but not without labor. When Smoot said they'd labored at that association enough with the Juniata Association, and then just a couple of months later, that's in session there that he's for cutting them off. I don't believe he labored enough. That's just my opinion. Obviously, he thought they did, but I don't. I don't think they did. I don't think they labored nearly enough with the Juniata Association. In fact, I'll go so far as to say, not having been there, I wonder how much labor there really was, or how much just saying you need to do it this way there was. Oh, yes, brother. How sweet it is when brethren dwell in unity. Man, oh man. This does sadden me to talk about things like this. And I'm going to equate this to Parker. Parker never cut off anyone for not believing in the two seeds, for not believing in the way he did in the devil, for not believing anything that he did. He never cut off anyone for not believing it. They cut him off. They cut his followers off. See, I think Smoot, that's the way Smoot should have been. And that's the way I'd like to be. I don't want to cut anyone off. But if they want to cut me off for what I believe, man, get to cut quick. cut quick because I don't care. Do it. Get it out. Man, I won't be with you anyway if you're that way. Well, brethren, I think I'm going to call it quits today. Let's bow. Heavenly Father, bless us, I pray. Thus to stand fast in the doctrine and practice that thou hast taught us from thy word. Let us be slow to cut off any, but let us rejoice if we are cut off from others or by others for thy truth's sake. Let us rejoice that we may stand fast in that liberty wherewith Christ has made us free. We believe you've taught us. We pray thy teaching would continue. Thou would show us more and more of thy glory, more and more of the beauty of our Redeemer. That thou would bless us with a revival of our faith and hope. Keep us in the way everlasting. For it's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. I fell asleep last night again, didn't call. I'm going to call probably middle of the afternoon their time and see if I can know anything about that then.